Well, there's been a lot of hullabaloo on the net the last couple of days about the sell Zack Snyder's Justice League to Netflix, and I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about this particular movement, where it's coming from, and the destination I think it's ultimately going to land. It's a pretty short trip to Nowheresville. Well, we all know Zack Snyder's Justice League was one of the bigger things that happened on HBO Max, and to suggest that he doesn't have a dedicated fan base would be folly. The Snyderverse is hugely popular with a segment of the fan base, and recently they've taken to social media to try to bring it back to life once again. So let's dive into that story. Now, before we do that though, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and ring that bell for all the news. We want to be your place for all the DC and Marvel news, but we want to bring it to you truthfully and transparently, so you are really in the know. Well, over the weekend, we started to see a new movement from the Snyder Cut supporters over on various forms of social media. Now, this particular new movement has garnered so much attention, even Forbes has chimed in. So I thought we could take a couple minutes to dive into that, talk about it a little bit, and exactly why I don't believe this is even remotely possible or going to happen. Now, there is absolutely no doubting that Zack Snyder's Justice League has probably one of the most dedicated fan bases for any superhero project, and maybe even any other fandom on the internet. The movement still has a ton of energy, despite the recent moves by Warner Bros. Discovery and the newly formed DC Studios to clearly move into a non-Snyder-based future for DC films. Now, this group of fans definitely have gotten a lot done. After years of online campaigning, they did get Warner Bros. To complete the Snyder Cut for HBO Max. But once that was complete, many fans felt like that was just the beginning, and they started pushing for Snyder to get to finish his trilogy, along with other projects like Ben Affleck's Batman or the air cut of the original Suicide Squad. Now, over the past couple of weeks, if you've been paying attention, you've seen a lot of boycott WBD hashtags along with Fire James Gunn. We don't typically participate or focus on any of that kind of negativity. I don't think it's productive. But over the weekend, you saw fans try to turn that around a little bit and basically propose the idea to sell the Snyderverse to Netflix. Now, I understand this idea, and I think I understand where they're coming from. If you know what's going on in the movie business, Zack Snyder currently has an awesome deal with Netflix and is producing his own films over there, like the previously released Army of the Dead or the upcoming movie Rebel Moon. Additionally, Netflix actually bought one of the VFX studios that worked on Justice League previously, and quite honestly, Netflix actually lacks its own superhero franchise that the idea being the Snyderverse could possibly fill. Now, I have to say, I understand the idea fully, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, and I don't get too deep into my opinions, but I think this is complete and total fantasy land. It's not that this fandom hasn't achieved way more than anybody has ever expected of them, but in this case, I think there's just absolutely too many variables working against this particular movement to even potentially have any luck on either side of the ball, Warner Brothers or Netflix. You have to ask yourself a couple of questions from both perspectives. So let's start with Warner Brothers. And these are some of the questions that Forbes was asking, and they're really pretty rock solid. First, you have to ask yourself, why would they agree to spinning out what would essentially be another DC universe that would compete against their new rebooted DC universe and potentially take funds away from them? This wouldn't just be a rival form of competition like Marvel. It would literally be airing the same characters in different stories and peeling away from their own customer base. Now, if they were to sell them to Netflix, it could be potentially worth billions of dollars. But even if they had a huge payday up front, in the long term, especially when you look to the returns that Marvel Studios has gotten, this would make terrible financial sense and quite honestly would produce a massive, convoluted mess for many fans who are not very familiar with the bigger picture when it comes to DC movies potentially existing on two platforms. The Zack Snyder fanbase is pretty big, but it's definitely not big enough to support a project of this caliber all on their own, leaving the viability of the project really as a monster-sized question. You would also have to ask yourself why Netflix would pay billions of dollars to have access to the Snyderverse alone. Not only would they have to buy the rights, they would have to fund potentially some of the most expensive movies ever made. One of the first things fans want to see is Justice League sequels, and that movie on its own cost $250 million to make before Joss Whedon got hold of it, and then required another $73 million to finish before it went on HBO Max. How would they potentially make a profit with no box office return because there wouldn't be theatrical runs? To me, there's no possibility Netflix would invest this level of money in this particular franchise, of very little guarantees on a return on that investment. Now, I do always agree, taking a positive approach to trying to solve some of these fan problems is way better than the negativity that tends to spew from most social media. And really, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook have plenty of it. I love the idea of the movement trying to find an alternative plan, and I can appreciate that. But I don't think on any levels this will ever happen. There's no way DC will set up a competitor with their characters in a separate universe, and there's really no way Netflix is going to spend that kind of money. If I'm being honest, I could see DC Films potentially finishing the trilogy in animated form, or maybe DC Comics doing something like that, but selling them to Netflix for either party is probably completely out of the question. I can understand why fans got pretty excited about it, but I would be utterly stunned if this ever happened. I could possibly be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I just really don't think this is going to be one of those cases. I know a lot of you guys are pretty big fans of the Snyderverse, so I am curious on what other ideas besides selling to Netflix you guys might have. Make sure you drop those in the comments below.